2023 is here, and now is the time to start planning for your hardware budget for next year. Hello and welcome back to the Sam Beast YouTube channel. My name is David.foxen. Thank you very much for joining me today as we look through how I personally would prepare a hardware budget for the next financial or calendar year, depending on how your organization runs it. Before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and really helps get these videos out there. We've got a lot more ITAM content planned for 2023. Let's get into one of my most favorite tasks of the year, building the hardware budget and the hardware plan for the next year. There are 5 bits of advice that I'm going to give you in this, and hopefully a lot of them, to be fair, are common sense, but hopefully you find it useful and can apply it when dealing with your hardware budget. The first thing that I typically look at is our internal scheduled retirement dates. Now, by this, I mean what our organization has defined as the internal useful life cycle for that particular model or asset type within our organization. This is typically 3 to 5 years for things like laptops and phones, maybe 5 years for desktops, 7 years for monitors, and maybe even network equipment at 7 years. And even some of the more specialist, beefier equipment can even last 10 years. So I want to have a look through the scheduled retirement dates to understand what maybe hasn't been refreshed in the previous years and what is due for a refresh in the up and coming 12 months. Immediately factor in replacing those into the hardware budget to make sure that we are following our own hardware refresh process and our own scheduled retirement policy. Now, remember, when you're doing this, don't just look at your end user based assets, but look at everything that you're responsible for within your ITAM or hardware asset management scope. So this may also include network equipment, servers, and even niche stuff out there that's only relevant for your organization. If you have an asset management database, an AMDB, that's regularly updated, or you've created rules within your AMDB to look at the purchase date and then add on 3, 5, 7, 9, 10 years, then it's a simple export and you can have a look and manipulate the data to understand how many assets you will need to refresh as part of your hardware refresh process. If you don't have an AMDB, I would suggest looking at the purchase date and then adding on the number of years that that model or that particular hardware asset has within a useful life within your organization, and then establishing, even in Excel, the most used ITAM tool, establishing what assets you need to replace next year. Next thing I want to do is have a look at any of the assets that are out of warranty now, or any assets that the vendor or our hardware reseller are saying are coming to end of life, end of support, and even end of production with them. Now, end of production is a big issue at the moment, especially with the supply chain issues, but more on that later. But I make sure that I have that regular communication with the hardware vendors to say, here's our portfolio, here's our approved hardware convention. What models are you expecting to end of life next year, and what are the alternatives? That way I can build in the alternatives into the hardware refresh plan, and I also then know the quantities that I'll need to replace because that particular model is end of warranty, end of support, or end of life. At this stage, I'll also do a double check with our internal scheduled retirement dates, make sure that there's no duplication in there, so I'm not double counting the number of assets that I need to budget for and replace in the next year. While I'm talking to the hardware vendor and supplier about the changing models, I'm also going to understand what price changes there may be next year. Hardware prices fluctuate a lot more than software due to the availability of materials, due to even manufacturing issues. But a rough ballpark on what they're expecting the prices to fluctuate by over the next year will give me a much better understanding and a much more accurate prediction on what the hardware spend is going to be for next year. So once I've looked at scheduled retirement days, I've looked at the end of warranty, I've looked at end of support, and even the end of a particular model with the hardware vendor, the next thing I'm going to do is talk to my internal stakeholders, to my HR or my people management teams to understand the growth plans for next year or the reduction in staff plans for next year. Again, this is really important for us to understand how many extra assets we're going to need to order in. You know, from an infrastructure perspective, does that mean we need to order any more network equipment? But typically from an end user computing, how many more laptops, mobile phones, tablets, desktops, monitors, etc. are we expected to order because of the growth within the business? Likewise, if the news isn't so good and we're reducing the amount of people that we're hiring, or even, there's going to be a hiring freeze or we're getting rid of people, we need to understand the rough numbers and percentages of that too, so that we don't over budget for next year and don't over order the hardware. I also want to speak to other key stakeholders as well as HR or people management to understand any new projects that are coming in. These new projects may not necessarily mean an increase in the number of people, or it may do, but it may mean that they're going to need extra equipment for testing. They're going to need new particular models that are brand new to the organization that we need to onboard and make sure work within our environment. Or they may even go out and go shopping and find multiple different models or hardware vendors that are completely new to the organization to fulfill a particular new project or a specific requirement. Again, I need to know about that. If it's coming out of our cost center, if it's coming out of items responsibilities, I want to know about the potential new models, the potential costs associated with that so that I can budget for it. So be proactive in the first instance. There may be projects that are actually born and developed in that year that weren't planned for at the start of the year. Obviously, that's outside of your control. But for planned things, please make sure that you're getting information on that and the requirements. Finally, I also want to understand the supply chain issues. This was a big problem in 2021 and 2022. And with the increase in COVID in China in particular, it's potentially going to be a big issue in 2023 as well. Is there going to be supply chain issues and delays with the model that we have in our hardware convention? If so, what alternatives are available? What alternative manufacturers are available that have better lead times for a similar model with similar performance that will still work within our organization? I want to do all this research, all this due diligence in advance. I want to understand the pricing of the respective model that's a like-for-like replacement of our existing one on our hardware convention. And I want to put a bit of a buffer in the event that we cannot get our approved hardware model. This is almost plan B, if you like. If we can't get the approved model that we've already got and we've already budgeted for, plan B is move to a different manufacturer, order X amount of quantities at this amount of price, and we've already factored that into our budget, so it's not going to be a surprise in the event that we can't get the equipment to us quick enough. So they're the 5 steps that I go through when trying to build my hardware budget for next year. Again, a reminder, this is for all of the assets within hardware asset management or ITAM scope. If it's not within my scope, not within my budget, I'm not forecasting or planning for it. That's going to be at the responsibility of the key stakeholders who actually own that equipment and own those assets. Once you know the quantities, so your refreshes, your end of life, your growth, your new projects, the new models, etc., if you've got some good solid numbers based on your really good AMDB data, get those orders in early so that you can make sure you've got that bulk order in, and then you can take down basically all of the stock that you need for all of the different locations on particular months. So there's no mad scrambling around to say, we're out of stock, we've got no equipment, we're going to have to go shopping and try and buy stuff. Something else that I also, just an added bonus on here as well to mention, if you've got any plans to IT asset disposition, aka resell or repurpose to try and get money back for your old assets, if you've got a rough understanding on how many of those you've got in the next year, it's a good idea to maybe factor that into your budget. So if you know that you've got grade A, grade B, grade C laptops of a particular model, you know what they all were for last year, you can roughly estimate how much you're going to get back for those assets next year. And with that, hope you found it useful. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, happy ITAMing.